I never thought a single mistake would change everything in my life. Emma Hayes whispered to herself, staring at the door she had just been escorted out of. Her breath hitched, the cold breeze from the city's streets cutting through her like a sharp knife. She was fired. Just like that. One moment, she was a hardworking, dependable employee, and the next, she was out on the sidewalk with nothing but her purse and the crushing weight of injustice. She had spoken up. She had raised her voice against the discrimination she saw happening behind the walls of the office. And for that, she was punished. Emma knew the system was broken, but nothing could prepare her for the harsh reality of what it would cost her to fight back. She had stood up for what was right, and now she was left alone, with nowhere to turn and no one to trust. But little did she know, this was only the beginning of a journey she could never have anticipated. As she walked away, her phone buzzed. She checked it, half expecting a call from her mother or a friend, but instead, it was an unknown number. Hesitant, she answered. Miss Hayes, the deep, authoritative voice on the other end, sent a shiver down her spine. This is Victor Marino. I need you to meet me. Her heart skipped a beat. The name Marino was one she had heard whispered among the city's elite, a name tied to power, money, and danger. She had no idea what he wanted with her, but she was certain of one thing: her life was about to change. Victor Marino was a man of few words, and everything about him screamed power. He didn't make requests, he made demands. The fact that he reached out to her so soon after her dismissal was both terrifying and oddly reassuring. She agreed to meet him, even though her instincts told her to run in the opposite direction. He didn't take no for an answer, and she didn't want to find out what might happen if she refused. As Emma walked into the lavish building where Victor asked to meet her, the air seemed to thicken with tension. She was led through hallways adorned with expensive artwork, her heels clicking against the marble floor, echoing in the silent space. She tried to keep her composure, but every step felt heavier than the last. The man who opened the door to the office was nothing like she expected. He was tall, imposing, and dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. His presence filled the room, and it was impossible not to feel the weight of his gaze as he studied her. His piercing eyes seemed to see straight through her, as if he knew everything about her already. Miss Hayes, he began, his voice smooth but firm, I hear you've got a problem with injustice. I can fix that. Work for me. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know whether to be terrified or relieved. The idea of working for someone like him, someone who had the power to change everything, was overwhelming. But there was something about his calm confidence that made her wonder if this was the opportunity she had been waiting for all along. And if I don't? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor's lips curled into a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his cold, calculating eyes. You'll wish you did, he said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Emma stood there, caught between fear and curiosity. She knew this wasn't the kind of offer most people got. She could either walk away and let the world crush her, or she could take a chance and step into a life filled with power, danger, and an uncertain future. But as she looked into Victor's eyes, she knew she didn't have a choice. Her old life was gone, and in its place, something new was about to begin. Emma hesitated as she stepped into Victor Marino's office, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. The room was immaculately designed, a testament to the power and wealth that Victor controlled. The walls were lined with rich, dark wood, and the view of the city skyline from the large windows seemed to stretch endlessly. She couldn't help but feel small in this vast, impersonal space, a mere speck in a world that had so much more to offer than she had ever known. Victor stood by his desk, looking out the window, his broad shoulders filling out the tailored suit with ease. His presence was commanding, almost suffocating. Without turning around, he spoke in a voice that was both calm and unwavering. Sit. It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. Emma took a deep breath and complied, sitting on the chair across from him. She tried to steady her nerves, but the tension in the air was thick. I assume you know why you're here, Victor continued, his eyes never leaving the city below. She nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure she understood what he wanted from her. She had been hired, but the weight of the unknown pressed down on her. "You want me to work for you, but what does that really mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Victor finally turned to face her, his icy blue eyes locking onto hers. There was no warmth in his gaze, but there was something deeper, something calculating. "It means you stop running from your past. It means you stop playing by the rules that have kept you small, and you start playing in the big leagues." His words were sharp, purposeful. "I don't need someone who will cower. I need someone who can stand up, like you did." Emma wasn't sure if she should be reassured or terrified by his words. Standing up for herself had cost her everything. But now, Victor was offering her a chance to be something more, to be part of a world where her voice might actually matter. "What exactly is it that you want me to do?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Victor leaned back in his chair, the faintest of smiles curling at the corners of his lips. "I want you to help me build something powerful. Your mind, your intelligence, it's exactly what I need." He paused, watching her closely. "And in return, I'll ensure you never have to worry about being dismissed or ignored again. You'll be untouchable." Emma felt a surge of emotions, fear, excitement, and a deep sense of uncertainty. She had always lived her life by her own rules, but those rules had never gotten her far. And now she was standing on the edge of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. But could she trust Victor? Could she really align herself with someone like him? "You're not just offering me a job, are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "No, I'm offering you a new life, Emma. One where you're not just a worker or a pawn. One where you're in control of your future." The words hung in the air like a promise, but Emma wasn't sure if it was a promise she was ready to accept. She had always been in control of her own destiny, but now she found herself at the mercy of a man whose world was full of shadows and secrets. She had a choice to make. "So, what happens now?" she asked, trying to steady her racing heart. Victor's eyes darkened, and the smile left his lips. "Now, you prove yourself. You show me you're worthy of this opportunity. And if you do, there's no limit to what you can achieve." Emma nodded, her mind racing. She knew this was a turning point in her life, one she could never undo. The stakes were higher than ever, and she couldn't afford to make the wrong move. But as she stood up to leave, something inside her stirred. She was no longer that woman who had been silenced and dismissed. She was Emma Hayes, and she was about to make her mark on the world, whether she was ready or not. Emma sat in the lavish office of Victor Marino, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her chest. The walls were decorated with dark, rich tones, and the city outside was a blur of lights in the late evening. Victor was sitting behind his desk, his demeanor calm but piercing. It was only the two of them in the room now, and the air was thick with unspoken words. Victor didn't say anything at first. He just watched her, his gaze sharp, assessing. Emma could feel her pulse quickening. She had been sitting in silence for what seemed like forever, the hum of the city just outside the windows, the only sound breaking the stillness. It wasn't like her to feel uncertain. She had always known what she wanted and what she was willing to do to get it. But sitting here, in this room, with this man, it felt different. She was no longer in control. "What exactly is it that you need from me?" Emma finally asked, her voice betraying a slight tremor she couldn't control. Victor's expression didn't change, but there was a subtle shift in his posture, a slight lean forward. "I need someone who can think, who isn't afraid to make difficult decisions," he said, his tone cool but direct. "I need someone who understands what it means to take risks and who doesn't back down when things get tough." He paused, letting his words sink in. Emma could feel the weight of his gaze on her, like he was testing her. "And you think I'm that person?" she asked, not trying to hide the doubt in her voice. "You've shown me you have the guts," Victor replied. "You've been knocked down and still got back up. That's the kind of person I need." Emma shifted in her seat, trying to process what he was saying. She had always prided herself on her resilience, but this was different. She wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was entering a world of power, a world where every move could cost her everything. "What exactly would I be doing?" she asked, her curiosity now getting the better of her. Victor leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "I want you to be my right hand," he said, his voice unwavering. "Help me build my empire, make the right decisions, handle the things I can't. You'll have power, influence, everything you've ever dreamed of." Emma's mind raced. Power. Influence. Those words had always seemed like something distant, out of her reach. But now, they were right in front of her, within grasp. "And what's in it for you?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Victor's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "It's simple. I need someone who can handle the things I can't afford to waste time on. Someone I can trust." Emma paused for a moment, taking in his words. There was something about him, something in the way he carried himself, that made her believe he was telling the truth. He wasn't just offering her a job, he was offering her a seat at the table of power. The question was, could she accept? "What's the catch?" she asked, already sensing that there was more to this than he was letting on. "The catch," Victor began, his gaze never leaving hers, "is that once you're in, there's no going back. You'll be in the world I live in and everything that comes with it. You'll see things, hear things, be part of things that most people would never even imagine. And you'll have to decide where your loyalty lies." Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she processed his words. There was no sugarcoating it. This wasn't just a job. This was a life-altering decision. She could stay in her old world, where she was just another voice in the crowd, or she could step into the unknown, a world where power and influence were the only currencies that mattered. She took a deep breath, her mind made up. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions she was feeling. Victor's smile widened, his cold eyes glinting with something unreadable. "Good," he said, standing up from his desk. "Then welcome to the real world." Emma stood by the sleek, glass windows, the city lights twinkling far below like a blanket of stars. The high-rise office felt both isolating and powerful, and as she stared out into the distance, she couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder at the world she was now part of. She had always known that life had its secrets, its dark corners, but now she was standing at the edge of something vast. Something she was still learning to navigate. The first few weeks working for Victor had been overwhelming. The amount of information she had to process, the power struggles that she quickly witnessed, and the choices she was forced to make, it all felt like a whirlwind. At first, she had second-guessed her decision to join him, but now, the weight of it all was beginning to settle in. Victor had kept his promise. He didn't waste time. She was involved in meetings, dealing with powerful people, navigating negotiations that most would never have the chance to be a part of. She was no longer the woman who had been fired from a corporate job. She was now an integral part of something far bigger. Something that had the potential to change the course of her life forever. "Emma." The sound of Victor's voice cut through her thoughts, and she turned to see him standing by the door, his presence as commanding as ever. "Yes," she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, even though the nerves that had settled in her stomach were hard to ignore. Victor stepped closer, his eyes searching hers with that same intensity she had felt the first time they met. "You're doing well," he said, his tone flat, but there was an underlying approval in his gaze. "But you need to understand something. This world, it doesn't slow down. You either keep up or you fall behind. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, her heart racing. She had learned that lesson quickly. There were no slow days in Victor's world, no time to relax or think. Every decision had weight, and every move had consequences. But there was something else, something that gnawed at her, something that didn't sit right. The more she got involved, the more she realized that Victor wasn't just a businessman. There was a darkness about him, a depth that she couldn't quite grasp, and yet, she felt drawn to it. Drawn to him. She had always prided herself on being able to read people, to understand their motivations, but with Victor, it was different. He was an enigma. "I'm ready," she said finally, her voice firm. "Good." Victor's lips twitched in what almost resembled a smile, but it was brief, fleeting. "I'll keep pushing you, Emma. Don't mistake kindness for weakness." Emma felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't back down. She was here now, and she wasn't going to let fear control her. Victor wasn't the only one who had the power to change things. As the days passed, Emma found herself in situations she had never imagined. She was meeting high-profile clients, advising Victor on crucial deals, and handling sensitive matters that required both tact and strength. She had learned to trust her instincts more than ever, and each challenge made her feel more confident, more capable. Still, as much as she excelled in this new world, a part of her remained conflicted. She had been hired to be Victor's right hand, but what did that really mean? She was constantly questioning where she stood with him, how far would he push her, and how much of herself would she lose in the process. But one thing was certain, Emma Hayes was no longer just a woman who had been fired from her old job. She was becoming someone new, someone who was willing to fight for her place in this dangerous world. And she was determined to see just how far she could go. The office was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the city below, but Emma felt a nervous energy in the air that made her pulse quicken. She had learned to adapt to Victor's world, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the weight of the decisions she was about to make hit her harder than ever before. She stood by the window, looking out at the sprawling city, her thoughts racing. Everything had changed since she agreed to work for Victor. She was no longer the woman who had been fired from her last job, struggling to make ends meet. Now, she was part of something bigger, something dangerous, and something that could either make her unstoppable or destroy everything she had worked for. The sound of the door opening pulled her from her thoughts, and she turned to find Victor entering the room. His presence filled the space immediately, his sharp gaze locking onto hers. "You've been thinking a lot," he said, his voice smooth, but there was an underlying seriousness to it that made Emma's stomach tighten. She nodded, trying to keep her composure. "I'm just making sure I'm ready for what's next," she said, her voice steady, though she could feel the uncertainty creeping in. Victor didn't respond right away. He just watched her as if weighing her words carefully. Then, with a slight nod, he spoke again. "You've proven yourself so far," he said, his voice more approving now. "But there's more ahead. There's always more." Emma's heart raced. She had seen the power he wielded, the people who feared him, and the things he had done to get to the top. But there was something else about him, something that intrigued her. Something that made her want to know more, to understand him better. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor took a few steps closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I mean, there's always a price to pay, Emma. The higher you climb, the more you risk. And the more you stand to lose." His words hit her harder than she expected. She had always known that power came with consequences, but hearing it from Victor, the man who seemed to control everything around him, made it feel real in a way that was almost suffocating. She swallowed hard, trying to push past the knot in her throat. "I'm not afraid," she said, more to herself than to him. Victor's lips curled into a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good," he said, his tone firm. "Because there will come a time when you have to decide what you're willing to sacrifice." Emma nodded, her mind spinning. She had come so far already. She had faced so many challenges, and she had overcome every single one. But this was different. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about something much bigger, something that could change the course of her life forever. "I'm ready," she said, though doubt lingered in the back of her mind. Victor gave her a nod of approval, and for a moment, Emma felt a flicker of something like trust, or maybe something more. But just as quickly, the moment passed. "We'll see," Victor said, his voice cold again. "Stay sharp. We're about to enter a new phase, and things are going to get more complicated." Emma met his gaze, feeling a mixture of excitement and fear. This was it. There was no turning back now. She had crossed the line, and she couldn't go back to the life she had before. She was part of Victor's world now, and there was no escaping what came next. "I'm with you," she said, her voice steady as she met his gaze. "No matter what." Victor's smile returned, but it was brief, and for a split second, she thought she saw something different in his eyes. But then it was gone. "Good," he said again, turning towards the door. "Then let's get to work." Emma stood in front of the large conference table, her hands resting lightly on the edge as she watched Victor and the others file into the room. It was another high-stakes meeting, one that would shape the next few weeks of their work, but there was a weight in the air that made it feel different. The room was filled with people she had come to know well over the past few months: executives, investors, people who knew how to make the world bend to their will. Yet, despite the powerful faces in the room, it was Victor who commanded the most attention. His presence filled every corner of the space, and his sharp gaze was enough to make anyone hold their breath. As he walked to the head of the table, everyone instinctively straightened up. "Sit," he said, his voice calm but firm. The room obeyed without question, but Emma's heart raced. She had never been part of a team so powerful, and yet, here she was at the center of it all. Victor looked at her once as he took his seat, his eyes unreadable. "You've done well so far," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "But this is where things get complicated." Emma nodded. She knew that. Everything had been moving at a breakneck pace, and while she had proven herself in the smaller decisions, this was the big league. "What's next?" she asked, her voice steady despite the nervous energy she could feel building in her chest. Victor turned his gaze toward the group, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. "We move in on a new project," he said. "This is bigger than anything we've done before. If we get this right, it'll change the game for us." The room was silent for a moment as everyone digested his words. Emma tried to keep her focus, but the weight of his words hung heavy in the air. She had seen what happened when Victor said something would change the game. It meant risk. It meant sacrifice. And it meant no room for mistakes. "Emma," Victor said, his voice cutting through her thoughts. She looked up, meeting his gaze, steady and unwavering. "I need you to oversee the details. The team will handle the rest, but I trust you to keep everything in line." She felt a rush of something: pride, fear, excitement, mixing in her chest. She had never been given a responsibility this big. The pressure was immense, but she wasn't going to back down now. "Understood," she said, her voice firm, matching his intensity. He gave her a nod, and for the first time, she saw a hint of approval in his eyes. It was fleeting, but it was there. "Good," Victor said, turning his attention back to the others. "Let's get to work." As the meeting unfolded, Emma found herself immersed in the task at hand. She was no longer just an observer in Victor's world. She was now a key player, responsible for steering the direction of the company. And with every decision, every move, she could feel herself changing. She was no longer the woman who had been cast aside, dismissed as just another employee. She was someone with power, influence, and a role to play in a world where the stakes were higher than ever. As the meeting came to a close, Emma stood and walked out of the room, her mind racing. With the weight of everything that had been discussed. The project was bigger than she had imagined, and the risks were greater. But she wasn't afraid. She knew what was at stake now, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. She had made her choice. She was in this world, and there was no turning back. The only question now was how far she was willing to go to succeed. The days following the meeting were a blur for Emma. Each morning, she walked into Victor's office, her mind buzzing with new responsibilities and decisions that she had to make. The weight of it all was suffocating at times, but she was determined not to let it break her. She had worked too hard to get here. As the week went on, Emma found herself deeper into the project than she had imagined. The stakes were higher than ever, and with every meeting, every call, every decision, it became clear that failure was not an option. Victor had been pushing her harder, demanding more, but she could see the way he was watching her, waiting to see if she could really handle it. At first, she was unsure if she was living up to his expectations, but then, during a late-night meeting, something changed. Victor had asked her to prepare a report on the financials of a new deal they were making. It was a massive opportunity, one that could elevate their entire operation. But as she dove into the numbers, Emma realized that there was something wrong. There was a discrepancy, a small, almost unnoticeable flaw in the projections that could lead to disaster if not addressed. She hesitated for a moment. If she pointed it out, it could delay the deal. If she ignored it, it could cost them everything. She took a deep breath and made the call. "Victor," she said when he picked up, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "There's an issue with the projections. We need to fix it before moving forward." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then Victor spoke, his voice calm but with a hint of something else. What kind of issue? A financial discrepancy, she explained. It's small, but it could cause problems later on. If we fix it now, we'll be in a much stronger position. Victor was quiet for a moment. Longer, and Emma could almost feel the weight of his judgment. But then he spoke again, his voice softer than usual. I see. Good catch, Emma. Fix it, and get it back to me. The approval in his voice made Emma's heart skip a beat. It wasn't just that he had listened, it was that he trusted her. He trusted her judgment. The feeling was intoxicating. As she hung up the phone, Emma realized something. This wasn't just about power, influence, or money anymore. This was about proving to herself that she was capable. That she could do this. That she belonged here, in this world of high stakes and even higher risks. Days turned into weeks, and Emma found herself taking on more and more of Victor's responsibilities. She handled the deals, the negotiations, the risks, all while navigating the complex web of personalities and power struggles that came with the job. She was becoming more than just Victor's right hand. She was becoming his equal. And with that came a sense of confidence she hadn't known she was capable of. But it also came with its own set of challenges. Emma began to notice subtle changes in her relationship with Victor. It was nothing she could point to directly, but it was there. In the way he looked at her, the way he trusted her with more than just business decisions. There was an intensity in his gaze, a lingering attention that she hadn't felt before. It wasn't overt, but it was enough to make her wonder. She pushed the thought aside. Now was not the time to get distracted. She had worked too hard to lose sight of her goals. But even as she pushed those thoughts away, she couldn't help but wonder where this would all lead. Would she be able to keep her place in Victor's world? Or would she lose herself in the process? Only time would tell. But for now, she focused on the work, on proving herself, on making sure she was ready for whatever came next. Emma stood in the dimly lit office, her hands gripping the edges of the desk as she stared at the reports in front of her. The numbers didn't add up. The deal that had seemed so promising was beginning to unravel, and the pressure to fix it was starting to weigh on her. It wasn't the first time. She had faced a challenge like this, but the stakes had never been so high. As much as she had grown into this new role, as much as she had proven herself, this felt different. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed. She could feel Victor's eyes on her, even though he hadn't said a word. She had learned to read him, his silences, his small gestures, but this time, it was as if he was waiting for her to figure it out on her own. It was always like this with him. He would push her, challenge her, but never give her all the answers. Emma. His voice broke the silence, as smooth and commanding as ever. She turned, her heart racing. Yes, she asked, trying to keep the uncertainty out of her voice. I need the numbers fixed. I trust you to get it done, Victor said, his gaze unwavering. Emma nodded, her mind racing. She had been given the freedom to make decisions, to take control, but now she was facing the consequences of those decisions. If she didn't fix this, it could cost them everything. I'll handle it, she said, her voice steady, though inside, she was battling the growing sense of doubt. As she sat back down, she looked at the reports again, the figures swimming in front of her eyes. She knew what needed to be done. She had always known. But this time, the challenge wasn't just about solving the problem, it was about proving to herself that she could do it, that she was capable of handling the responsibility she had taken on. Hours passed, and Emma worked in a determined silence, adjusting the figures, recalculating, reviewing every detail. The weight of the situation didn't leave her, but she pushed through. She couldn't afford to fail, not now, not after everything she had worked for. When she finally completed the revisions, she felt a surge of relief. But there was no time to celebrate. She picked up the phone and dialed Victor. It's done, she said when he answered. There was a long pause, and for a moment, Emma felt her heart skip a beat. Then Victor's voice came through the line, calm and approving. Good. You did well. The simple words felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She had done it. She had faced the challenge, and she had succeeded. But as she hung up, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Victor had given her a nod of approval, but she knew it wasn't enough. She was still in the game, and there was always more to prove. She couldn't let her guard down. Not now. Not ever. As the days went by, Emma found herself taking on more and more responsibilities. The business was expanding, and with it, the demands on her. Victor was pushing her harder, expecting more, but she was rising to the occasion. She was no longer just a part of the team, she was one of the key players. The confidence she had gained in her role was evident in every decision she made, every meeting she led. But there was still one thing that lingered in the back of her mind, her relationship with Victor. She had tried to keep it professional, tried to focus on the work, but the dynamic between them was shifting. There were moments when their eyes met, and she felt a connection that went beyond business. She pushed those thoughts aside. She had a job to do, and she couldn't afford to let anything distract her. The world she was in now was unforgiving, and there was no room for weakness. As Emma continued to prove herself in this high-stakes world, she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer the woman who had been fired from her old job. She was someone entirely different now, someone powerful, someone capable of handling whatever came next. Emma stood by the window, staring out at the city below. The skyline was bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, casting long shadows across the streets. She felt the weight of the day settle on her shoulders. The success of the project was almost within her grasp, but the pressure to keep things on track was relentless. She had come so far, but she knew that the next move would define everything. The door to her office creaked open, and she turned to see Victor standing in the doorway. His presence was as commanding as ever, but there was something in his eyes, something that made her pulse quicken. "How are the numbers looking?" he asked, his voice steady, but there was an edge to it, as if he was testing her. Emma took a deep breath, pushing down the rush of emotions that had been building up inside her. "It's all set," she said, her voice calm, though she could feel the tension in her chest. "We're ready to move forward." Victor stepped into the room, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good," he said, his gaze sharp, appraising. "You've done well, Emma." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had been working relentlessly, making decisions, taking risks, and managing the chaos of the deal. But hearing his approval, hearing him acknowledge her efforts, made everything feel worth it. For a moment, it felt as though time stood still. But then, Victor's gaze shifted, his expression unreadable once again. "But this is just the beginning," he said, his voice low. "We're not finished yet. Not by a long shot." Emma nodded, her mind already shifting into the next phase of the plan. She had never been one to settle. Not when there was more to achieve. "I understand," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." Victor's lips curled into a faint smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I know you are." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "One more thing," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "You're not just a part of this anymore. You're leading it now." The weight of his words sank in. Emma had always been part of the team, part of Victor's operation, but this was different. He wasn't just entrusting her with a task, he was giving her control. The responsibility was hers, and with it, the power to shape everything. As Victor left the room, Emma stood there for a long moment, letting the gravity of the situation settle over her. She had come a long way from the woman who had been dismissed from her last job, unsure of where she was headed. But now she knew. She wasn't just surviving in this world anymore. She was shaping it. Her future was no longer uncertain. She had taken control. She was in charge. And nothing, not even